Robert, so we got some big stuff on the menu tonight. I think the number one of which is the WHO. I mean, the number one of which is what the hell is going on with the WHO. And I mean, I tried to look into it. I mean, I think I understand what's going on, that they're going to establish a global pandemic response to signatory nations. And it would seem that a lot of nations have become signatories to this. Do you want to elaborate on the details of what's going on?
Yeah, so what's still misunderstood is there's a belief out there that the Biden administration is lobbying the World Health Organization to adapt a range of rules governing its members that would empower the World Health Organization to centralize responses to a pandemic. Now, those rule changes are not legally binding on the United States until a treaty is proposed to the United States Senate. We joined the World Health Organization. It's kind of an organization designated by the United Nations by a joint resolution in Congress, not by treaty. So there's no legally binding. This is why Trump was just going to unilaterally withdraw from it and was on pace to do so before the election fornication of November 2020. So the rules that they're talking about passing are not. You'll see misleading references in the press that there'll be talk of it being binding. There'll be talk of it being a treaty. It's not. The World Health Organization was not formed by treaty in terms of the United States participation in it. The United States, only thing we said in Congress was we'll give 1 year's notice and pay our dues when we leave. But there's no treaty out. Only treaties are supreme law of the land. No treaty has passed giving the World Health Organization any legal power in the United States. So even if these rule changes pass that the Biden administration is trying to push through, they do not become legally binding on the United States until and unless a treaty. Now, they're talking about taking these rules and conforming them into a treaty and proposing that treaty, but that is still several years by their own timetable away from happening. And in fact, multiple countries have said they're not interested in delegating power of that type to the World Health Organization. So there's a desire for it to occur, but there's been a lot of overreaction in some parts of the political universe because they think it's politically binding. It is not. It is not. Any statement you see that says it's politically binding is either someone that's in good faith that's misunderstood it or somebody that's in bad faith that's trying to misportray it. Whichever the case may be, it's not legally binding until a treaty passes. That requires 2/3 consent of the Senate. It has to go to the Office of Legal Counsel. It has to go through the State Department. It has to reach multiple levels of review before it's even proposed to the United States Senate. Then the United States Senate has to debate on it, and more than 2/3 have to approve it for it to become binding law. And that we're not near that.
Well, you're not near that, except there are people out there who want to get some people to repeat misinformation, either to make them look stupid or to create a panic that, might serve their interests. But Robert, some people are going to say it doesn't matter if it's in a treaty or not. If nations indicate a willingness to abide by them, treaty or no treaty, the national governments of any given country are going to enact similar policy to reflect what is a de facto treaty, even though it has not been passed. I mean, so
it's just not legally binding in the United States. So it's like the climate accords that we ignored and just walked away from. So it's not something that's legally binding. It's something that it can be taken as an advisory basis in the United States, and the same with most countries, though other countries vary as to the enforceability of joining such an agreement. I can tell you that there's all kinds of things they've joined that they have not abided by. I mean, right now, the Geneva Convention is something that most countries have joined, and both Russia and Ukraine are not abiding by it. Because what's the disciplinary mechanism? There isn't one. So that's the other factor, is that a law isn't a law if it's not enforced. And so even these kind of treaties don't tend to – this goes back to the old UN treaty. There was a lot of talk in the 50s at the time that meant the United Nations could govern the United States. No, it didn't. That wasn't the scope of the treaty, and it had no inherent enforcement power. So that's even more true with the World Health Organization. So people have been emailing me saying it looks like World Health Organization is going to get to run U.S. policy. No, they're not. Nothing about these rule changes gives them any legally binding power in the United States.
Yeah, the problem is, though, I look at Canada and say, we have the treaties. It needs to be passed, and if it's not passed, whatever. But the problem is, if the prime minister in our country or the provinces are going to behave in such a manner anyhow, they're going to implement similar rules
It'll
and
be those.
that are
Yeah, I
inspired
mean,
by.
nothing prohibits Biden from doing whatever Biden's going to do other than the laws and Constitution on the book. But there are people who thought that this World Health Organization rule change would supersede U.S. law. It does not.
Okay.
So it doesn't stop politicians from doing what politicians can currently legally do, but it does not empower them to circumvent or override existing domestic law in the United States.
Now I'm going to give hallelujah. This is now spamming. This is the exact same comment and the one you had before. So please stop spamming. Spammers and Russian sex bots are the only ones that get actually blocked on this channel. Okay, so that's good. So people cannot panic in that it's not now international law that's applicable to all, I don't know, all nations. Rather, indication of where things might go. But the bottom line, in any given country, any given state or province, the government might nonetheless implement these rules regardless, even if it's part of a treaty or not. We'll see.
Yeah, kind of like the Iran deal, and Obama used the Iran deal to do what he did, but it wasn't legally binding, and that's why Trump could reverse it when he got in. So now it doesn't stop Biden from redoing a similar deal, but they're still limited by the Constitution and the domestic laws of the United States as to what they have power in, because you can't sign away, you can't change the Constitution by just the executive branch declaring something. You need a treaty to pass 2/3 of the Senate for that to happen.
Okay, interesting. So no panic, but it might be the same practical
People should
reality.
be aware of it and should be resisting it. And what the Biden administration is pushing is a bad idea. And the treaties would be a disaster of an idea. But be aware of that, because some people are overreacting, and then that will lead people to not be alert when the treaty is actually being proposed. It is part of my concern with overreactions to this.
Robert, I mean, people say China runs the WHO. We can get into it.
China has influence on the World Health Organization, no question about that. They didn't do the meaningful inquiry and cover it up at the beginning. China is one of the biggest participants in the World Health Organization. They don't really run it, though. I mean, the United States with Biden probably has more influence than China does right now. So it varies as to the who has power in the World Health Organization. I would call it a globalist institution that more often than not serves globalist purposes rather than any individual nation's purposes.
All right, now River Table. I don't know. I didn't think River Table was spamming, but River Table is chatting about protests going on in Australia. So check it out. But thank you, River Table.
Elections upcoming in Australia,
and we'll see what. Apparently, Australia, which was like, the epicenter of loss of freedoms, is now more free than Canada, which still seems to be going in the wrong direction. But hold on, you said something about the WHO. For goodness sake, Robert. Okay, I'm going to forget about it. Okay, so be aware of it, but it has not become international law, and we are not yet subject to the WHO. Oh, you mentioned globalist agendas, Robert. I mean, this might bring us into the Ukraine news of the week. I just had a thought the other day where people who changing avatars, people who are heavily into the conflict in the Ukraine, and heavily into getting $40 billion of military aid to Ukraine, are running on the idea that Putin is the one with global domination, aspirations of global domination, when it might seem that now that we're seeing what's going on in that part of the world, that it might be the other way around, and there might be other interests that have the actual global domination interests. What's the latest news coming out of Ukraine before we get into the war crimes trial of a Russian soldier with Finland, with Sweden, and with Ukraine's bid for NATO membership?